Do you remember the first time you met somebody really important? The first time I met my wife, Karin, was at the Detroit Zoo in Royal Oak, Michigan. I was with a group of friends and it was a freezing cold night. It's about 10 or 15 degrees, bundled up, big winter coat. I had a big hat on. In the back seat of my friend's car, she had this American flag infinity scarf. And I thought it would be kind of funny with an old group of friends if I just wrapped this American flag scarf around my face so that all you could really see were my eyes peeking through the scarf and this big hat I had on. We were going to the zoo. We were meeting up with a couple of old friends, and I thought it would just be this funny joke that everybody would laugh at. Well, when I arrived at the gates of the zoo, Karin, my wife, was on the other side of the gates, and I remember thinking, wow, she is super beautiful. And here I am standing with the American flag wrapped all around my head, big goofy hat on, big coat, all you can see in my eyes. I just felt so ridiculous. But when you're in that situation, you can't really take the scarf off and try and pretend like you're not actually wearing it. So I just kind of went with it. And we walked through the zoo. I introduced myself to Karin with this big goofy ensemble. I remember just thinking what I would do to redo this first impression. I wonder if you have any stories that you could share in your group of first impressions, the first time you met someone, maybe had an interview with a boss or important person in your life. How did that experience go? In today's passage on the book of Revelation, Revelation 1, 9 through 20, we get not a first impression, but a really clear revelation, a clear unveiling of what Jesus is like. Pastor Mark did an excellent job in his sermon this past week describing the beauty and the bigness that we see in the person of Jesus. In Revelation 1, 12 through 16, it reads, "Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me. And turning, I saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of the lampstands, one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze refined in a furnace. And his voice was like the roar of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars. From his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face was like the sun, shining in full strength." I wonder today if you know Jesus in that way. There's 2 things I want to focus on in this passage. The first thing that I want to focus on is that we encounter Jesus in the midst of the church. It says he is among the 7 lampstands, which are the 7 churches, and a reference to every church in every era. So the first thing we learn about Jesus, the unveiling, is that he's amongst his people. God is not ashamed of the imperfections of the church, at times the hypocrisy of the church, sometimes the pain that exists in relationships in the church. Jesus is not distant from those things. I'm so glad that you are all in a life group this fall, and some of your groups are just new, they're beginning to form, and perhaps you're wondering, where's this group going to go? Where are these relationships going to lead? I just want to encourage you with the words that we find in Revelation that Jesus is amongst you, and that he cares, that he's growing, he's developing, and he's binding us together as God's people. So be patient, hang in there, get to know people in your groups, invite people out to coffee, share life together, really be there for one another, knowing that it's not just you guys doing it on your own strength, that Christ is amongst you, that he is weaving us together as his body and his bride. The second thing that I want to focus on is the description that we see of Jesus. It says his hair is white like wool. There's a flame of fire coming from his eyes. His feet are like burnished bronze. There's a 2-edged sword coming from his mouth. It's this incredible, vivid imagery describing characteristics of Jesus. And as I was thinking about this time of teaching, I think it's really important to pay attention to the big theme here. And the big theme is who Jesus is. Pastor Mark asked a question in the sermon this past Sunday of, do you know Jesus? And just the simplicity of that question, I think is one that's worthwhile reflecting on again this morning or this evening. And so The following sermon is a sermon that was preached in the 1970s. It's got a bit of a different style than perhaps we're used to, but it's a question again asking, do you know Jesus? And there's going to be description after description about who Jesus is, what Jesus has done, what he is like. So just in our groups today as we go forth for this teaching time, I want us to have imaginations that are enlarged by the beauty of who Jesus is. I want us to have conversations that spur us on to think deeply, more truly, more biblically about the revelation we see of Christ. If we go through Revelation and we get lost in the weeds, we get lost in the details, and we don't see who Jesus is, I think we're going to miss the point. And right from the first chapter, as the first chapter concludes, I think it's so important that we spend some time reflecting and understanding who is Jesus. So listen in to the sermon.
He's God's Son. He's a sinner's Savior. He's the centerpiece of civilization. He's unparalleled. He's unprecedented. He's preeminent. Well, he's the loftiest idea in literature. He's the fundamental doctrine of true theology. He's the miracle of the age. He's the superlative of everything good. He's the only one able to supply all of our needs simultaneously. He's available for the tempted and the tried. He sympathizes and he saves. He heals the sick. He cleanses the lepers. He forgives sinners. He delivers the captives. He defends the feeble. He blesses the young. He serves the unfortunate. He regards the aged. He rewards the diligent. And he beautifies the meek. Do you know him? Do you know my King? Well, my King is a King of knowledge. He's a wellspring of wisdom. He's a doorway of deliverance. He's a gateway of glory. He's a pathway of peace. He's a roadway of righteousness. He's a highway of holiness. His promise is sure. His light is matchless. His goodness is limitless. His mercy is everlasting. His love never changes. His word is enough. His grace is sufficient. His reign is righteous. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. Do you know him? Well, he's incomprehensible. He's invincible. He's irresistible. I'm trying to tell you, the heavens of heavens cannot contain him, let alone a man explaining him. You can't get him out of your mouth. You can't outlive him, and you can't live without him. Well, Pharisees couldn't stand him, but they found out they couldn't stop him. Pilate couldn't find any fault in him. The witnesses couldn't get their testimonies to agree. Herod couldn't kill him. Death couldn't handle him, and the grave couldn't hold him. That's my King. He always has been, and he always will be. I'm talking about he had no predecessor, and he'll have no successor. There was nobody before him, and there'll be nobody after him. You can't impeach him, and he's not going to resign. That's my King. Yeah! Do you know him?